Listen carefully, because what I am about to tell you is something the entire world got completely backwards. When the dust settled on May 10th, 2025, every television screen on the planet was screaming the same word: ceasefire. People were dancing in streets. Anchors were crying on live TV. Donald Trump was already printing the victory poster, telling his followers he personally dragged two nuclear powers back from the edge of annihilation. And for exactly 3 days, the entire planet collectively decided the nightmare was finished. The bombs had stopped, the missiles had gone quiet, two countries that could erase each other from the map had blinked, and now the world could exhale and move on to the next disaster. But you have been lied to, not by accident, by comfort, because what the world called an ending was not an ending at all. What the world called resolution was nothing more than a temporary pause in something far darker, far larger, and far more dangerous than anyone on mainstream television has had the courage to tell you. To truly understand what happened and what is still coming, you need to strip away every emotional headline, every diplomatic press release, every self-congratulatory tweet from Washington, and look at the raw architecture of what actually occurred. On April 22nd, 2025, 26 tourists were massacred near Pahalgam in Indian-administered Kashmir. India pointed its finger directly at Pakistan-linked militants. Pakistan denied everything, as Pakistan always denies everything. India did not wait for a United Nations investigation. India did not call an emergency summit. India launched Operation Sindoor on May 7th and sent missiles screaming into Pakistani territory, not along some contested borderline, not into some remote tribal wilderness, but deep into the Pakistani heartland, near major cities, near the outskirts of Islamabad itself. Pakistan answered with Operation Banyan-ul-Marsus. For 4 consecutive days, two countries, with enough nuclear firepower to kill tens of millions of people, were hurling missiles, drones, and airstrikes at each other at a scale the subcontinent had not witnessed since 1971. And then it stopped, and the world cheered, and that is exactly where the world made its fatal mistake. Ask yourself one brutally honest question: was this war resolved, or was it simply interrupted? Because those two things are completely different, and the answer changes everything about what happens next. Here is what actually changed after those 4 days. India shattered a doctrine that had held for decades. For the first time in modern history, Indian military strikes landed in Pakistan's Punjab heartland, not in disputed Kashmir, not along the line of control, but in the core of Pakistan itself. That threshold had never been crossed. India crossed it. And here is the terrifying truth about crossed thresholds: you cannot uncross them. Once a government demonstrates the willingness and the capability to strike an enemy's heartland, the entire strategic equation between those two countries is permanently rewritten. India sent a message so loud it does not need translation. The old rules are dead. We will hit you wherever we believe the threat begins. That is not a policy adjustment. That is a seismic shift in the entire military logic of South Asia. Now ask yourself, what did not change? Kashmir is exactly where it was the morning of April 22nd. The Indus Waters Treaty, suspended by India, remains suspended, which means Pakistan's agricultural lifeline, the water that feeds its farms and its people, remains under Indian control as a pressure lever. Pakistan's military and intelligence apparatus, its deep institutional relationships with non-state militant groups, the very engine that drives this entire conflict cycle, remains structurally intact because dismantling it would require the Pakistani military to dismantle part of its own identity. The Indian domestic political environment, where every government faces volcanic electoral pressure to respond to terrorism with maximum visible force, has not changed by a single degree. And the Kashmir dispute itself, festering and bleeding since 1947, has not moved 1 single centimeter toward any form of resolution. The ceasefire touched none of these things. It walked past every single structural cause of this war and declared victory. Now I want to force you to look at something even more disturbing, because the India-Pakistan story is only half of what this crisis revealed. For decades, the unspoken architecture keeping South Asia from destroying itself was American deterrence, not always visible, not always elegant, but real and functional. When India and Pakistan approached the nuclear edge in 1999 during Kargil, Bill Clinton made the phone call. He told Pakistan's leadership to stand down or face total international isolation. Pakistan stood down. The system worked. But watch what happened in 2025. J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, looked at two nuclear-armed nations exchanging missiles and said publicly that this conflict was fundamentally none of America's business. Read that sentence again. The second most powerful official in the United States government watched a potential nuclear exchange unfold in real time and declared it irrelevant to American interests. Trump eventually swept in and claimed the credit for the ceasefire, but only after the situation had already reached catastrophic levels and only because it gave him a headline. What that tells you about the future of American deterrence in South Asia is absolutely chilling. American intervention is now discretionary. It is unpredictable. It depends entirely on what plays well in domestic American politics on a given Tuesday afternoon. The reliable phone call that stopped the 1999 war will not reliably stop the next one. And when that backstop disappears, every country in the region is suddenly doing its own security mathematics alone, without a safety net, and that is precisely how spirals begin. Here is what the mainstream media completely failed to tell you during its wall-to-wall ceasefire celebration coverage. This conflict did not happen in a vacuum. It happened simultaneously with an active American military campaign against Iran. It happened alongside the fracturing of the global petrodollar architecture. It happened while energy costs across South and Southeast Asia were spiking. It happened while Pakistan was crawling to its 25th IMF bailout. It happened while a new multipolar world order was rearranging every alliance, every dependency, every pressure point across the entire region. This is not a bilateral story about two angry neighbors with an old dispute. This is a regional detonation embedded inside a collapsing global order. And Pakistan sits at the exact epicenter of that collapse. Simultaneously, its most vulnerable actor and its most pivotal one. Vulnerable because of economic fragility so severe it requires international rescue missions just to function. Vulnerable because of water insecurity, internal political implosion, and a neighbor that has now publicly announced it is no longer deterred by Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. But pivotal because Pakistan has something almost no other country on the planet currently possesses. It has active relationships on every side of the emerging multipolar divide simultaneously. It demonstrated this with stunning clarity when it helped broker the US-Iran ceasefire in early 2026, a diplomatic achievement so unexpected it left even Pakistan's harshest critics temporarily speechless. But here is the knife edge Pakistan is walking. Countries that try to be indispensable to everyone eventually reach the moment where everyone demands they choose a side. And when that moment arrives under pressure, under fire, under economic crisis, you do not get to choose on your own terms. Someone else chooses for you. Pakistan stopped this war. Let us be precise about what that cost. Pakistan absorbed Indian missiles landing near its capital city. Pakistan retaliated with enough firepower to avoid looking broken. And then, Pakistan accepted a ceasefire that India's own Prime Minister publicly described as having been requested by Pakistan. That is not a victory. Dress it however you want, celebrate whatever you need to celebrate, but India suspended the Indus Waters Treaty, and it remains suspended. India struck the Pakistani heartland and paid no lasting international price for doing so. India announced to the entire world that Pakistan's nuclear deterrent is no longer sufficient to prevent Indian conventional military operations on Pakistani soil. That statement alone, if it stands, changes the entire strategic reality Pakistan has operated inside for 30 years. Every rupee Pakistan now spends preparing for the next phase of military confrontation with India is a rupee that does not go to the water infrastructure that is already failing. It is a rupee that does not go to the agricultural investment that Pakistani farmers desperately need. It is a rupee that does not go to the educational system that is producing generation after generation of young people with no economic future. Every single military escalation with India is simultaneously an act of economic self-destruction. The ceasefire bought time. But time is not inherently valuable. Time is only valuable if someone uses it to actually fix something. I want you to hold one historical image in your mind. When the First Peloponnesian War ended in 445 BC, Athens and Sparta signed what they called the 30 Years' Peace. Everyone celebrated. The war is over. The crisis is resolved. For 14 years, they were technically correct. No open warfare, trade resuming, diplomacy functioning, and then a dispute over Corinth and Corcyra dragged both empires back into a war that ultimately destroyed both civilizations. Not because the leaders were evil, not because they wanted annihilation, but because the structural tensions that caused the First War had never been resolved. They had only been deferred, and every deferral made the eventual explosion more catastrophic. India and Pakistan are standing in that exact same place today. The ceasefire of May 2025 does not even have the formal architecture of the 30 Years' Peace. It is an informal arrangement held together by American phone calls from an administration whose vice president already said this conflict is none of their business. Kashmir unresolved, water weaponized, militant infrastructure intact, India's new strike doctrine operational, Pakistan's economy on life support. The global order that once guaranteed regional stability visibly disintegrating in real time. This is not a stable situation. This is a coiled mechanism under extreme pressure, with every structural cause still active, and now a new precedent establishing that heartland strikes are permissible and that American deterrence is optional. The pressure that built to May 2025 did not vanish when the shooting stopped. It compressed further. It went underground, and the next trigger, whatever shape it takes, whoever strikes the first match will find a region that is far more primed for catastrophic escalation than it was before the first missile flew. Pakistan stopped the war. That matters. But stopping the war only matters if the people making the decisions understand with absolute clarity that what just happened was not the end of this story. It was the beginning of a far more dangerous chapter, and the choices made in the next months and years will determine whether the next time the guns speak, there is anyone left with the authority, the will, and the channel to make them go quiet again.